session. I hope you can hear me okay. Let's kick off the session. A big welcome to everybody. And at the very beginning of the session, I would like to quickly do a land acknowledgement to acknowledge that our Queen's University is situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. I'm new to this land as I just moved in town in July as an immigrant settler. I look forward to further exploring and learning from this land as I process my work, study, and life here. Okay, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Yunyi Chen. I am an educational developer at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I am originally from China, and I speak English as my second language. I moved to Canada in 2012 as an international student, and then I became a Canadian permanent resident in 2018. While I was pursuing my degree, I encountered and also overcame numerous challenges, and one of which was related to my English academic writing. Okay, so I'm not really approaching this topic as a writing expert, but on the opposite, from the perspective of a struggling student and curious educational developer, as I truly want to understand what caused my challenges and struggles in English academic writing. So I delved into my challenges, firstly as a graduate student, and I also carried this research into my professional life, whereby I became cognizant that my English language proficiency actually was only part of the reason why I struggled so much in English academic writing. Okay, culture and there are many others also play a major role. Okay, I'm very excited to have you in my session today, and I look forward to discussing the topic with you and also with our panelists who will be approaching this topic from more of a writing expert, culture expert perspective. I've also invited one graduate student to join us today to add his voice into the conversation. Okay, I think I'm going to hand the floor over to our panelists to let them do a quick self-introduction. It's my great pleasure to have them in a session today with us to share their expertise, stories, and experiences. So may I suggest our panelists to start, maybe to go by the alphabetic order of your last name to have a quick self-introduction.
Okay, may I start? I'm sorry, I have a tech problem, so I join you using my cell phone, but still okay. Thank you so much. My name is Morlan Ling. I'm a fourth year PhD student in School of Rehab. Originally, I'm from Ethiopia. So it's my pleasure to be here and share my thoughts.
Thank you and welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Forstner. I work at Student Academic Success Services, and I have the privilege of working mostly with students who speak English as an additional language. I coordinate one-on-one programs as well as group programs to support those students with academic success.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lydia Skolstad, and I work at both the Queen's International Center and Student Academic Success Services. And I support international students and linguistically diverse students, helping them get connected to services and programs that support their academic success at Queen's.
Thank you so much, Lydia, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. So I highly encourage everybody in the session today to take the opportunity to communicate with our panelists and also share your stories, making comments and asking questions. Because the only one housekeeping item I have is this is really a conversational session in which I will be sharing some of my research, but also, I would like to invite you to engage with us as much as you can. So there is no formal way of let's have a Q&A panelist session at the end of the workshop, right? So it's like we're putting everything together. So as we process the content, I will be inviting our panelists to share or chime in or, add some of their thoughts and voices. And like I said already, I would welcome everybody in the session to also share with us your stories, opinions, and ask questions or seek for clarification as we process. Okay, so I hope I can engage you as much as I can. And also you will be getting my PowerPoint after the session, so you don't have to worry jotting down all the notes. Hopefully that's going to be helpful. Okay, let's move on to the next part. Before we officially start, I would like to take a few minutes to have an open communication with you about our session today, because I've learned in my previous experience, this kind of communication is very necessary to avoid some kind of misunderstanding or misinterpretation in terms of like why I put together the session, why I'm offering the session today. Okay, so first of all, the session aims to help educators identify challenges international students may encounter while learning to write academically in English through a culture perspective. So we're not really approaching this topic from the language expert or from a linguistic perspective. So culture will be the core of today's session. And also, I have no intention to simplify the issue, as I acknowledge and understand that academic writing has different manifestations in different disciplines and or subject fields. Due to the time limitation, it's only discussed as a general concept to help us differentiate from the ways our students from diverse cultural, linguistic, and educational backgrounds may have previously developed in writing. Okay, and also we might identify as we process in a session that some of the challenges are not unique to international students, but shared by other diverse groups of students. For example, maybe the first generation college students, maybe students from diverse high school experiences, or our Francophone students, our new immigrant students, or even students from indigenous communities, and we can all name a few. Okay, I guess the goal really is for me to engage you in critical conversations to start inspire ideas we can use to help all students who are struggling in English academic writing to help them achieve success. So this is the initial goal and intention for me to put together the session today. Okay, so please let me know if you have any questions or if you have something you would like to share. Please feel free to either type your questions or thoughts in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, please feel free to raise your virtual hand and we'll be inviting you to unmute yourself and share verbally. And I will be monitoring the chat with Lydia and Alyssa to hopefully not miss any questions. And our panelists may also either answer your question in the chat or they may answer questions verbally depending on the time and where your questions from. Okay, I hope we're on the same page and feel good to go. Okay, let me know if you have any questions anytime. Okay, so to begin today's session, I'd like to start talk about academic challenges. I am pretty sure that most of us have already known that while our international students bring widely different skill sets and educational backgrounds into our classroom, they also encounter unique challenges. Based on research studies, their challenges include, but not limited to, instructional methods, assignment requirements, and writing styles that are very different from what they experience in their home countries. Okay, among the many challenges, academic writing, critical analysis, and citation skills are the topics our international students identified as their major challenges in academic study. And I personally feel this research aligns really well with my lived experience as a former international student. I also encountered challenges in those areas, so I was inspired to compose this workshop series with 3 sessions, each addressing one of these challenges. Okay, and in today's session, we're gonna focus on the first part, the academic writing part. And there will be 2 more sessions to talk about critical thinking and citation practices, which has a relation to plagiarism or academic integrity. Okay, as you can see, I'm trying something new, or should I say creative, here in my session today in terms of the learning outcomes. Usually I will use a few bullet points saying we're going to identify something or define something, explore something. But in today's session, I would like to leave it to you to answer the key questions using your main takeaway from our session today. I think this will be a way I use to empower you with some level of autonomy. I hope you can find your own answers to the questions in terms of what challenges our international students in English academic writing on top of their English language proficiency. Okay, English language proficiency is one key point why our international students, especially EAL students, when they're struggling, it's definitely part of the reason, but there are many other reasons out there, cultural reasons, for example. And also on top of that, we need to start thinking what strategies we can use, we can implement in our practice to really help our students achieve success in English academic writing. So I would hope you find your own answer to those questions at the end of the session today. Okay, before we start exploring these questions, I would like to invite you to do a quick brainstorming activity to start recording your answers to the question on Google Jamboard. Okay, so I want to have a brief understanding. What do you think challenges international students in English academic writing on top of their English language proficiency, for example, the use of grammar, vocabulary? So before I sharing with you my research, I want to know firstly, how do you think their challenges in English academic writing? So my colleague Sandra will share the link in the chat for you to access the Google Jamboard. There are also going to be instructions on Google Jamboard to help you post your answers to this question. And we have about 5 minutes for this quick activity. And let me know if you have any questions or having trouble accessing the link. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your first or initial thoughts in terms of the question. I can see that some of you captured very important and also key points in terms of what challenges our international students in their academic writing on top of their language proficiency. Okay, so I would have your attention back to my PowerPoint. Let's move on with the content. I hope you can still see my shared screen. Let me know if there's any challenges or tech issues. To continue with our session, I have prepared a few short video clips to include voices and perspectives from diverse students about this topic. And these video clips come from a research project put together by Oregon State University a few years ago. As Canada and the States kind of share a similar academic context, I think those videos are also applicable in our setting and it also resonates with our students in terms of their challenges in writing. So the first video I'm trying to show you here really helps set up the tone of the session by explaining the importance of exploring academic writing from a cultural perspective. So let's check it out. So if you need to increase the volume on your end, please feel free to do so. I've already maximized the volume on my end, so hopefully you will be able to hear it all right.
Most scholars would agree that research into culture and writing began with the publication of Robert Kaplan's 1966 article, Cultural Thought Patterns in Intercultural Education. In it, Kaplan introduced the idea of contrastive rhetoric, the notion that people use different rhetorics when they write within different cultures. He went so far as to draw diagrams representing how people from different cultures write. The article created a flurry of interest and research, but it also drew criticism about oversimplification and that it might lead people to think ethnocentrically. The consensus now is that while it's important not to make assumptions that all students from a particular country or region will all write alike, that it's just as important not to overlook culture either. By doing that, it's easy to assume that American preferences in writing are natural or the most logical way to do things, when they are in fact shaped by culture, political values, and educational practices, as well as a 2,000-year rhetorical tradition dating back to Plato and Aristotle. For students from other cultures and rhetorical traditions, the values and expectations of American writing are anything but natural.
Okay, so follow the momentum of this video. I think it is important for us as educators to understand that writing is an activity normally embedded in culture, and it actually sets rules and patterns that are typically shared by a given community, meaning students from outside of the community may not necessarily understand the rules and patterns in terms of how we write. Okay, so based on research studies in academic writing, culture differences generally exist in our thought patterns, rhetorical preferences, and writing structures which correlate, or should we say overlap with each other in a lot of ways. And this is also not to say that there are only 3 cultural factors that impact how we write. Once again, due to the time limitation I have in the session, I use the 3 cultural factors as examples, and they are in fact many more cultural factors and also other factors await for us to further study and discover. Okay, so before I move on, I wonder if any one of you have any questions so far, you have anything you would like to share, your story, opinion, comments, or any of our panelists have some points to share at this point.
Thank you, Uni. One thing that I was thinking about just in watching the video and what you've shared so far is how important it is not just to think about and reflect on students and the other contexts they may have been writing in or studying in, but also, like, as educators, it's important for us to take time to reflect on the academic cultural expectations and assumptions in our contexts. So students who are new to this culture need instructors to be explicit, not only in what they're asking, but why they're asking it. So this is true from students who are, transitioning to Queens from high school, but also international students. And so, for example, like if you emphasize the importance of a specific structure, how to write an essay, how to organize a paragraph, you want to be explicit in those structural expectations, what you are expecting, but also take the time to think about and explain why those structural our expectations for this assignment. And so students want to know why should I write like this in this context? And I think maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that as we look into culture further.
Okay, thank you so much, Lydia, for bringing up that important piece of help them understand why we're doing this, right? Because as adult learners, they may feel more motivated to do it once they understand the reasons behind it. That comes from the andragogy we use, when we teach, adult learners. Okay, I want to take a quick pause here in terms of, just in case our audience may have a thought to share or have any questions. If you don't feel comfortable sharing verbally, please feel free to use our live chats. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, I want you to hear from you and to engage you as much as I can. If you don't feel it's a point for you to share just yet, no worries. We have many other opportunities along the way for you to share, ask questions, and hopefully you feel comfortable share stories, because I can see we have a few students, graduate students in our session today. So hopefully you can share some of your stories with us in terms of English academic writing. Okay, let me wait for 30 seconds. If nobody wants to share, I can move on. Okay, so the next part, we're going to talk about first culture influential factor, which is about our thought patterns. Okay, so our thought pattern refers to the mental process of reasoning and problem solving prevalent in one community. It's also how we perceive and interpret messages or images. Once again, there is a kind of membership attached to our thought pattern, meaning people from different community may think very differently. Okay, I hope we can all agree that the basis of writing is what we think. It's quite natural for us to express our ideas by thinking in our mother tongue. I know I did this a lot when I just moved over to Canada. I do the translation back and forth all the time, and that made me super exhausted after writing a paper or even attending a class. Okay, so I hope we all agree that we basically write what we think, and we turn to think in our mother tongue, which is always easier for us to do so. Okay. And as we learned in the video, back in the 1960s, scholar Robert Kaplan developed some diagrams to show us that we may possess different ways of thinking due to the first language we speak, which include a linear way of thinking or like a more parallel way of thinking, circular, digressive, and the last one is a little bit more complicated, which is constructed mostly out of the parallel ways of thinking, but also with subordinate structure in digression. So those are the 5 diagrams Robert Kaplan developed to show us our different ways of thinking. Okay, as I'm not a linguistic, so I won't go in depth than just showing you the diversity that exists in our ways of thinking. I think you probably have already noticed in a short video that Kaplan actually attached specific languages to those thought patterns, which was removed by me because I don't want to, leave as an impression of cultural stereotypes. Oh, if you speak this language, you must only think in a certain way. You can't think differently. That's not the intention of showing you the diagram. Instead, what I'm trying to do is to invite you to reflect on, okay, what's my first language and how do I possibly think? So if you don't mind, I would want to invite you to share in the chat what your first language is and which thought pattern do you think you are maybe using or you feel most relate to. Okay, if you can please let me know that, it will be great. If somebody feels comfortable, please feel free to share verbally. I'd like to hear from you if you feel comfortable. If not, let's communicate in the chat. So what's your first language and which way of thinking do you think you feel most related to? Or if you cannot find any diagram that you feel relate to, you can possibly share with us what's your way of thinking. Okay.
I would like to say something before, while others can think of their answers. My first language or mother tongue language is Amharic. I'm from Ethiopia, as I said before. I'm an international student. I have so many challenges. I have never taught or seen this diagram, and I have been receiving so many feedbacks from professors, instructors, and supervisors. I realize how the problem happens right now here, because if I see the diagram, I can put myself on number 2, because in Amharic writing, we have to provide all evidences, the trends, and we have to put everything. You don't have to go straight. or kind of linear. If you write it straight linear, you are not a good writer. That's how I was trained, I was educated. So the challenge is when the thought process, when I look at it retrospectively, because I have to translate it into Amharic and then translate it to English, it's back and forth translation. The good thing is it is done through my subconscious mind. But when I get feedback, I realize how this, happened, because that is very challenging. So the challenge come from, because I have been teaching undergrad student in Ethiopia, but I switch into Amharic and English. So that's the big challenge that creates insecurity. And sometimes I feel, am I on the right track? Am I making sense? So I really like the diagram, so I can put myself on number 2.
Thank you so much for sharing. I speak Mandarin as my first language. I feel like my way of thinking is more relating to the third one. So I oftentimes don't feel very comfortable sharing my thoughts directly. I will always find a detour to talk about something else before I eventually tell you, my key point. So that's from myself. Lydia or Alisa, do you feel comfortable sharing something about your ways of thinking? And also there's lots of conversation going on in the chat, offering fabulous information for us to learn from. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. So I put this in the chat. I'm an English speaker. English is my first and primary language. And growing up in Canada, I was raised in that linear tradition of communicating, especially in writing. But I've discovered throughout my university that I actually prefer reading articles that represent that more digressive writing structure. That's where I find myself drawn to. And I just want to kind of share another thought, and they touched on this a little bit in the video, and Eve alluded to this, that, this approach to, thought patterns and contrastive rhetorics, it has received a lot of criticism over the years for being reductionist and overly simplified. But I think we need to keep in mind that those criticisms are within the academic literature. And so this is, of course, a more nuanced topic. The reality of how people think and communicate and structure their language is a very complex topic. And so if we're coming at it from an academic perspective, then yes, there's lots of criticism to be had. But I think chances are within this group of folks, there's probably not too many linguists, there's probably not too many scholars of culture and language. And so these patterns, these diagrams can be really helpful in a practical way when you're working with students in your discipline, or if you are a student and you're trying to think about how you can, approach your writing so that it's appropriate for the context and is going to be well received from the audience. This can be a really good starting point to get those conversations going.
Yeah, thank you, Alisa, for sharing that, because I agree with you 100%. I guess the purpose for me to show everyone a diagram is to encourage everybody start to having a self-reflection in terms of what might be my way of thinking, and also realize not everybody thinks like me, especially more educators. Oftentimes, we kind of believe that if I think this way, everybody should think like me, which oftentimes is not the case in our class, right? So as long as we understand, we think in a particular way, and our students may think very differently. So when they write, they may express their ideas in a very different way, and that causes us to feel confused reading their paper. But the key is for us to understand why, and also find a way to help our students. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution in the chat. I've learned a lot from you, and because I only speak so little languages, it's really great for me to learn from you in terms of what language you speak and what do you think your ways of thinking is. Okay, to wrap up a little bit before we move on to the next culture factor, I guess by identifying the different thought patterns, the key is for us to understand that each academic writing style is a valid form of communication within their own cultural context, but can also be very easily perceived wrong in another way. Okay, so after talking about our different thought patterns, this provides us a very good segue to start talking about different rhetorical preferences in writing. Okay, so that's our second culture point. Okay, as you may have already known that there are different rhetorical preferences between writing in English and writing in other languages. Here is an example, okay? In English writing, students are required to bring out the theme directly and clearly at the beginning of their writing, express their personal views straightforwardly, begin with topic sentences, and then explain what are intended to do with the topic sentence in the following paragraph or the following essay. Okay, this is how I was taught when I try to learn writing in English. Okay, while writing in other languages, our students may start their discourse from very far preferring due to the belief that everything mutually reinforces. I think Molo may share something with us already in terms of he has to think of all the different information and put them together. Okay, so I think kind of like relates back to what Molo shared with us. When they are asked to bring up the theme directly and always give out the topic sentences, they may find this way of writing sound too direct or even rude because the key information is always listed up front, which makes some of our students feel like, okay, is it really necessary for me to read the whole AC or read the whole paragraph? I've already got your point at the very beginning. So that's a challenge some of our students might be facing writing in English, okay? So when they are required to write from far preferably in their own culture using their own language, they might, place background information first and then main point later, because they sometimes worry if they don't tell you all the background information, you won't be able to understand their main point. And this way of writing, unfortunately, may be considered as being bad writing in English in terms of sounding too ambiguous or confusing to some of our native English speakers. Okay, so now we've briefly talked about the different rhetorical preferences. Let me pause again and invite you to share some of your thoughts or even stories, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask our panelists, and myself will be very happy to help you clarify your questions, and I would love to hear from you again.
Hi, yeah. I think something that is quite interesting when we're thinking about these rhetorical preferences is that we can see these preferences repeated at various levels of communication. And so using the academic English example, that linear approach, what I mean by that is no matter your discipline, whether you're in biology or psychology or history, when you're putting together a piece of academic writing within this, Canadian English context, chances are you're going to have a bit of an introduction, and that's where you lay out the thesis statement or the research question. And then within the body of that piece, you've got your research, your data, your statistics, your evidence, your examples, whatever it is. And then near the end of the piece, we see the discussion or the commentary, or where you explain the significance of your results. And then we see that repeated at the paragraph level with the topic sentence, and then the evidence in the paragraph and some sort of commentary. And we can even see it at the sentence level, where you typically start a sentence in English with the subject and verb, your what, and then you provide some details, that extra information. And then the interesting part of the idea, why we should care about this, typically comes at the end. And so I think, the more we think about these preferences, these rhetorical patterns, and see them repeated at all these different levels, we can really start to appreciate how much this, impacts our communication and our ability to process the information that we're receiving from others as well. I know I worked with a student whose language does things differently. And so they were getting feedback that their writing was really hard to understand. Their instructor couldn't figure out what their main idea was, because in their first language, the key idea tends to come at the end of the sentence, like you said. And so being able to identify these patterns at these various levels can really help students and also help ourselves think about, what are we expecting? What are we looking for?
Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing. Molo?
Yeah, I want to follow up with Alisa. And I can speak for myself, my experience, but she said it and she reflected what I passed through, honestly. So thanks to people at SAS, I came far. When I shared the challenges, as you said, we have to take care of the sentence, the paragraph, we have to bring all the ideas. And then especially if you are expected to write analytical paper, at higher level paper, it's very challenging. Lydia mentioned before, what's expectation? Then when I came to Queen's, I didn't know about all these kind of expectations. It's very difficult to unlearn what I have already learned back home. Because, for example, in Amharic writing, there's no way to say that one idea in one paragraph, kind of. So when you look at it, my paragraph, there's lots of information in my paragraph. And that is a temptation to bring more information in my paragraph, make it more complex and confusing. So I think it is important professors can understand, international students' background and to try to make it clear. Sometimes some people assume, the expectation, but as a student, we fail to meet that expectation.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's important for us to all hear, this kind of importance for us. Like, once again, do not assume they already know the rules and patterns. Let's help them understand and write. I also want to get your attention in our chat here, because I think Margaret shared a really good point here. So her writing without following those preferences in, our Canadian context was criticized by Canadian editors, but also liked by people from England who also speak English. So this is another proof that even if we speak the same language, doesn't always mean we think alike, we write alike, right? So thank you so much for sharing, Margaret. And I would like to encourage everybody to share in the chat so we can all learn from each other. Okay, so what I prepared is another short video clip to show you some student voices. They speak different languages, and they're going to share with you their story writing following certain, rhetorical preferences. So let's check that one out. Okay, once again, please feel free to increase your volume if it sounds too small on your end. Okay, let's try that.
In America, I have noticed that the writing professors want short, concrete, understandable sentences. That's the way to write your composition. But in Turkish, what we do is we use long and elaborate sentences because we think that it's more poetic and it flows better that way, and you read it for the sake of getting some kind of a pleasure out of it, not necessarily just to understand the point. And also, we pay attention to the fact that we need to have these essays look good. So we have different punctuations that are just designed for visual pleasure. Like 3 dots, when you write a sentence, you end it with 3 dots, it indicates that the thought goes on.
Actually, exaggeration is acceptable in the Arabic way. On the contrary, sometimes it's acceptable or prefer to use exaggeration. It helps the writer to write. It helps him to express his feelings and describe whatever he wants to describe, and to attract the reader to his writing. And the reader would think that the writer is a good writer. And as an example of that maybe like he has the money enough to fill the sea. Actually, nobody has money to fill the sea, but that's indicator that he is rich. Unfortunately, American teachers won't see this point of writing, and they would just take that the American way is the only way. No, there is a lot of ways in the world, and they might deduct points, or it might affect the evaluation of the student that he doesn't know how to write.
What I have noticed is that Americans usually will introduce their main point or say exactly what they want to say right at the beginning. It's almost like organizing in the introduction their main point, and then they develop their main point. Well, in Ecuador, what we would like to do, or we sometimes tend to do, is that we don't present the main point at the beginning. We go around it and around it until we finally get to the point, which is in the middle. It's kind of like this idea of circularity, that we go around and around it until we get to it. A good example of this is if I want to talk about, let's say that yesterday I went to a party and two guys were fighting, got in a fight. This is how an Ecuadorian will tell the story. I will start by saying, remember Pablo. Remember how Pablo used to be in love with Mary. And remember Juan. Remember that he also liked Mary. Well, yesterday when we went to the party, they started drinking, and and I will go on and give you all these details, and maybe by the time I tell you yes, Pablo and Juan got in a fight because of Mary, you already have a complete idea of, or almost 95% of what I'm trying to tell you. In the case of an American, if I meet somebody for coffee, and it's a good friend of mine, is an American, we sit down, she will just go ahead and tell me, yes, Anna, you know what happened yesterday? Juan and Pablo got in a fight because of Mary.
Well, I think Americans are really direct. Sometimes they seem to be rude to me, looking from a Colombian perspective. Let's see, when I'm walking on the street in Colombia, in Bogota, my city, if I meet somebody on the street, I stop, and if it's a man, I shake his hand. If it's a woman, I kiss her. Here, I mean, people just pass and they don't say hello. Sometimes they ask me, how are you doing? And they don't wait for my response. So I think that's kind of rude. And that I think that is reflected in the way Americans write papers. They go straight to the point. They don't take the time to establish a relationship between the writer and the reader. And I think that's important in my culture. Well, I have a personal example. 2 weeks ago, I wrote an email to my friends in Colombia, and I asked them when was the birthday of one of our friends. And I went straight to the point. I didn't say anything else. And their reply was, "You are so rude, so unpolite. You didn't ask us how we were doing. You didn't say anything about you." And they were right. They were completely right.
Okay, so after hearing the stories of students who are studying in the US, I wondered if our students, our student panelists or our student participants, have anything you want to share in terms of rhetorical preferences in writing?
I can add just one point here. It resonates with me. I stayed in Canada 2 years. I went back home, and then everything was changed. And then people start challenging me. Oh, you are changed into wrong direction because I have to be polite. I have to, take time. There are so many, culture shocks and reverse culture shocks. But one point is fascinating is when I was back home, even though I was instructor and researcher, I've never think of who is my reader, who is my audience. I learned these pieces here, but in Ethiopian culture, I cannot talk generally because it's varied. But there's one book, Wax and Gold. American sociologists study Ethiopian society, and he say people don't like conversation, direct conversation. You have to make it secret. You have to make it wax and gold. It is up to the listener or the reader to understand. What do you mean? So you need to provide evidence. So the point is, when I bring all this together in my academic, journey here, sometimes it's challenging. But the good thing is it's a learning process. Again, thanks to many people. So I try to harmonize, what's my cultural background and then what's my expectation here? How can I harmonize is a big piece, but the journey is not easy.
Yeah, I appreciate when you said it's not an easier journey for everybody, right? Because academic language is nobody's mother tongue, but when you do not speak English as a first language, you almost have like a way more challenges building up on many things. And I think some of our participants shared in the chat that how are you is a rhetorical questions in Canada. I found it's really funny to read that. And there are many other comments in the chat. Thank you so much. I won't be able to address all of them, but I encourage them to take a look at their comments and sharing. I think those are like enlightening, and it's a good learning for us. Okay, so I think we should move on to the last cultural factors I prepared for the session specifically, which has something to do with our writing structures. As we have learned, at least that's how I learned, in general, English writing formats follow this so-called sandwich or hamburger structure of introduction, body, conclusion. While writing in other languages, we might not necessarily follow these three parts in writing. I'll give you an example. So to write in Japanese and to write in Mandarin, I think we share a very similar writing structure that is composed of 4 parts. So in Japanese, the structure is called introduction, development, turning point, conclusion, key short tenketsu. While in Mandarin, we call it beginning, following, turning, and concluding, 起承转合. So they're very similar. I can't say they're the same, but they're very similar. Okay, so I just want to quickly explain more about the structure from my Mandarin speaking perspective. So qi is the beginning of the essay in which there is a topic partly related to the theme. Okay, the role of chen is to follow the beginning paragraph and amplify it. In the third part, 转, the whole essay turns into another direction, meaning the topic introduced at the beginning and the following paragraphs will be addressed from a different perspective. And the intention of doing so is to surprise the readers so as to reach the climax of the whole essay. The last paragraph, 和, is to conclude the previous paragraphs with a particular point which refers back to the theme of the essay. Okay, so that's how we write. I don't want to say it's academic writing. It's a way we adopt to write. So before we learn academic writing, this will be something some of us will always refer back to in writing assignments. Okay, so in a short video, a Japanese student will explain more about this writing structure and offer you an example how she writes in this way, in this following the structure. Okay. So before that, I want to quickly talk to you about the reader and writer responsible issues, because this also helps us understand why in different writings, using different languages, we write differently, we use different writing structure. Okay. So based on research, English is considered a writer responsible language. Which means, which means writers need to make their ideas clear and understandable. This is why we're required to use topic sentences, use a clear structure, and also we are often encouraged to use roadmaps in our writing to tell our readers exactly, oh, this is about point A, this is about point B, the firstly, secondly, lastly, finally, right? So this is how we write, because I believe the goal of writing is more for conveying messages or sharing information or making a point. While other languages, as I used as examples here, Mandarin and Japanese, they're more considered as a reader responsible language, meaning the readers has multiple roles to play when they are reading an essay or a story. So they are not only responsible for reading the essay, but also for interpreting the deeper meanings and also appreciating the artistic beauty of the words. Okay, so there are certain expectations of, as a reader, you have to engage more in the reading, and there's certain level of interactions between the writer and the readers. I think one student in the previous videos mentioned that the writer is expected to build a relationship with their readers before they tell them the key point or share the key information. So this is one of the reasons why we use different writing structures when we are sharing our thoughts and opinions. Okay. So before I share the video with you, I want to once again take a quick pause, see if any of our panelists or anybody has a thought, or if you have questions. It's time for us to communicate with each other. I'll be checking the chat as well.
Yumi, I just shared one other resource in the chat. I know Sandra had a comment saying, the videos are really enlightening. And I think there's so much we can learn from these student experiences and their stories and what Molo has shared. And this is an ethnographic research study coming out of George Mason University. It's kind of old. I think it's from like 2007. But it uses lots and lots of student stories coming from, diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And there is a section in their research findings there about reader and writer responsible kind of conflicts that students have had as they're trying to figure out this writer responsible writing. And some of them, like you'll see some quotes or stories there, feeling like kind of like what Molo was talking about, like making your paragraph or your writing very, very complex, like that's really valued. Whereas then when they're trying to figure out this writer responsible culture and they feel like their intelligence is being questioned or demeaned in some way by it being forced to write in a way that seems so simplistic to them. So anyways, it's a great resource. There's lots of other things in there too, but I really appreciate all of the student voices and stories that have gone into that project.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. I think you brought up a very important point as what kind of perspective we use when we view our students. Are we kind of using a deficit model, right? When you write differently and then you're being wrong. So it comes up to, our initial understanding and also how we are reacting to the differences that may happen in our classroom. So we will talk about a little bit more about this kind of point of view. And as a promise, I'm going to show you the video to learn more about the different writing structure and to hear from Japanese students. Let's do that first.
The Japanese traditional writing style is a little bit different from American writing style. And the way I learned in my elementary school is Japanese essays should be divided into 4 parts, which is ki, sho, ten, ketsu. And there's a very famous Japanese poem that teaches us how to write Japanese essays. And this is the way what I learned. The title is The Daughters at String Shops. And key part is there are 2 daughters at the string shops in Osaka. And show part is the oldest daughter is 16 years old and the youngest daughter is 14 years old. And this is a 10 part. Japanese samurai will kill their enemy by arrows. And kid part is Japanese daughters at string shop will kill guys by their eyes. So in 10 part, we suddenly start talking about totally different things from the thesis. So readers can surprise, like what we are talking about is totally different from the story about the Japanese daughters. But when you come to the conclusion, you can see how this part is connected to the conclusion part. So 10 part takes very, very important role in Japanese essays. This is the way we get the attention from the reader. in American writing, it is very important for you to make everything very clear. But in Japanese writing, this is a bit different because readers are supposed to participate the story much more than American writing. It means that, for example, when in Japanese writing, there are so many pronouns. And there are so many pronouns, but this is reader's job to understand what this she is and what this he is and what this it refers to. And I tend to do that when I'm writing American, like English essays, and everyone asks me like who this he is and who this she is. I don't understand. But for me, guess what? This is your job to understand it. But this is a very different part. So in American writing, like writers has a lot of responsibility for their writing, but in Japanese writing, readers have more responsibility to understand and participate the story.
Okay, so I wonder, hearing the Japanese students further explaining this writing structure and sharing her stories, anybody feels comfortable sharing some of your stories here, either about your thought patterns or maybe your rhetorical preferences or writing structure, or if you have any questions accumulated as we are here, please feel free to share.
I just add one point here. As I said, the learning process is interesting and I've been challenged, but it's a great challenge to be more competent and academically mature. But my challenge is I have to, in my writing culture, I have to wait to the very end to tell the key message of my writing. But here, Alisa can tell a story. Here, my professors expect me to show the main point in front, So this kind of, challenges, but still, as I said earlier, it's very important, to navigate what's expected here and how can I bring my own tradition and making sense. Sometimes some professors give you flexibility to show your creativity, but the challenge for me is I have so many repeated information. So the recurring comment I got is I repeat myself. So that is a big take home what I got through my journey.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I can 100% relate with you because I do the same thing. I don't tell everybody what I want until the end. So I think I've covered the 3 culture factors I prepared for the session. I think now you can see how they're like overlapped in a way, right? How we think is reflected in what kind of rhetorical preference we use and the writing structure we use, and they're all related. And there are many other reasons that working together to making English academic writing challenging for students who do not speak English or coming from a different educational cultural background. And there are also some comments in a chat. Thank you so much for your contribution. I want to pause for another quick second, just in case anybody want to share something. We have a lot of graduate students in the session today, also instructors, educators. Anybody cares to share anything? Alisa, you have
Sure,
something?
I'll just expand on the comment that I just put in the chat that, what I really appreciated about this video is that the speaker the student gives a really practical example. And I think sometimes when we talk about expectations for, especially if there are any educators in this group, when we're giving students instructions, we provide pretty high level instructions, very kind of abstract meta language. And so breaking that down and asking ourselves, okay, what do I actually mean by that? What does that look like? What practical steps can the student take, or should I be taking to make this high level goal actually happen?
Yeah, thank you so much for the comments, Alisa. Yeah, I agree, and I feel like what I prepared only scratched the surface of the whole complicated issue in terms of how culture impacts how we write, but at least I have you in my conversation now to sharing your thoughts with me and maybe have a reflection together later in terms of how can we work together or work in our respective role to support our students in their English academic writing. Okay, before we start to talk about educational strategies, I wanted to take a few minutes to discuss with you the big C and small c views we may use when we talk about culture, because it's a very complicated issue. And sometimes it's very easy for us to fall into the traps of cultural stereotypes or cultural dominance. So this is why I think it's worth our time to pause a little bit and exploring culture from the big C and small c views, because culture is the key perspective I use to view the academic writing issue. Okay, so this view of academic writing through an overly broad or general perspective in terms of culture is called the big C view. So basically, we kind of like group people by their cultural background. For example, if you are from China, you must perform a certain way, or you must think in a certain way. So this kind of like a stereotypes. When we think of culture from a very overly broad perspective, that's something we might fall into accidentally. This view is very problematic because it only focuses on the fundamental differences between cultures, and we need to avoid it, because this view may lead us to, first of all, othering our students based on how we believe their culture defines academic writing or how they understand academic integrity, right? So if they are different, if they write differently, they think differently, then they are wrong. Okay, so it's kind of like we're othering them. They're different from us and they're wrong, right? And it may also impose the North American or Canadian culture over other cultures. Our way is the best way, as one of those students mentioned. Sorry, the US way is the best way, as one student mentioned in the videos, but there are many other ways out there. So your way does not always provide all the answers to our questions, right? And also thirdly, it may kind of like force us to generalize and view this kind of deficit view over our students and believe when they are different, they are in need of redemption. Okay, so they need to fully assimilate into this dominant culture, which actually is a way of neo-colonialism and oppression. So this is when we only look at culture as like fixed and only as something general. So this is something the kind of view we need to avoid because it's problematic. I'm pretty sure we've all heard of stories in terms of cultural stereotypes and how that hurt our students, right? So by avoiding the big C view of culture, we need to maybe view culture from more like a small c view, which on the contrary view culture as constructing specific practice or process rather than an abstract concept. Okay, basically speaking, the small c view helps us perceive academic writing in terms of specific conventions or different practices in certain discipline, courses, or even at different tasks our students are asked to complete. Okay, so this view helps us translate the broader, generalized culture into specific skills in writing in mind by the specific assignments our students need to accomplish. Okay, so basically speaking, we view culture as specific academic skills required in certain courses or required by certain tasks. When we face differences in our class, we don't go off and tell them your ways of doing is wrong, but thinking more like, okay, let me help you as an educator develop a new skill set. So you are able to navigate this new learning context, or you are able to achieve success in a specific learning or academic context. So there's a difference between the big C and small c view. Does that mean that big C view has no use at all. We should don't talk about culture at all, which is not what I'm trying to see. Because it's important for our students to understand why they may write in a different way, because they might feel frustrated about themselves. Because I had very similar experience myself. I feel like everything I do was wrong at the beginning of my academic journey. I feel like I was talking very differently. I was thinking very differently. I was, of course, writing very differently. And I feel like my confidence level dropped drastically. I feel like, okay, what I've learned, what I have adopted, does not seem to be valued, or doesn't seem to be able to help me achieve academic success. So we need to help them understand, we're different in different ways, but the mere understanding of cultural diversity in academic writing is not sufficient. Our students will still need to go ahead and develop and practice all the academic skills they need to be able to succeed in our classes. So that's basically what I'm trying to see here. So to sum up a little bit, so although overgeneralization or stereotypes against international students or diverse students we have should be avoided, cultural differences that do exist in the practices of academic writing should not be overly ignored. Okay, the solution lies in the integration between a big C and small c views in our teaching practice. As our international students need to understand the differences, but also learn specific skills, as I quickly alluded previously. Okay, so we have covered the three cultural factors I chose for our session today. Before we go ahead to talk about educational strategy, I want to once again pause here, just in case any of our panelists or anybody in our group today has something to share, okay, either in the chat or if you feel comfortable just speaking up. Yes, Molo, please go ahead. And then Johanna will be next.
Yeah. Thank you so much for brought this very important point for this discussion. I would like to start, like in my discipline, we call it twin track approach, taking the big picture at the same time, individual needs differences. I can see universal values in academic writing and academic culture. The pursuit of writing good literature or finishing your PhD, and they're beautiful things. But what sometimes I see is too much assumptions. Against students who come from the same culture. I may be off topic, but if I share my own experience, I was in US. We were 12 from Ethiopia, and one of the educators, they say, "Oh, you guys speak different English," because his assumption was we were from Ethiopia. Our level of understanding writing in English should be the same, but that was wrong. Because if I tell you from my own experience, I was grown up in rural area. I had only one notepad for a semester. Even if I try to write, I have to make sure I have to save that exercise book for the whole semester. I didn't have computer. I didn't learn anything. And then there is no English teacher when I was grade 5, 6, because he was assigned, he didn't come. So we're left alone. When I moved to schools in town, I feel insecure because I say, I cannot fit this school with students who were privileged to go to good school. So what I'm mentioning this is we all have different predisposing factors. We came, as I said, I came so far, but some people, there may not be a good word, some people may be privileged to go to good school, have native English teacher, so they don't have that challenges. So assuming, people come from the same culture, in the same country, can perform at the same level is something inappropriate. So we should understand. We should avoid cultural stereotypes, but asking effective communication, as we said, clear instruction and open dialogue would help international students, I believe.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, Johanna, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, thank you. I was going to try and put this in the chat, and then I thought, I don't know if I can articulate it well enough in writing. But I was just thinking, this idea of differences between cultures in the sort of big C view. And I wonder if, you've thought about similarities as also being an equally kind of potentially dangerous way to think about things, because I find often, when there's stories about sort of immigration or something like that in the newspaper, we see these sort of narratives of like, see, here are a group of people that like holidays and family events and they're just like you kind of narrative. And our value and people's value is not in the fact that they're like you. You shouldn't appreciate them because they believe the same things you do or that kind of thing. And so I was just thinking about this issue of that, validating a student if their cultural tradition of writing is similar to the one that you've learned or grown up with, and saying like, okay, see, you do it the right way kind of thing. That so there's these kind of I don't know quite what I want to say about this, I guess, but this idea that just because it's the same there's not a validation there necessarily either. Does that make sense?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I just want to quickly, maybe extend a little bit from what you said, Johanna, because culture is only one factor of our being, doing, and thinking, right? So we're a complex intersectionality in terms of culture, age, education, our social status, our nationality, our first language, and even our, lots of other factors influence us in terms of how we write, how we read, how we learn, right? So there's a whole complex issue, in terms of academic writing, although we're only approaching this issue from a cultural perspective. I think it helps us to start thinking or having self-reflection questions in terms of who I am and who are my students, and how can we work together, even if we're so different in so many different ways. Okay, so originally I was planning to have a group discussion. Like a small group discussion in terms of, the educational strategies you might be able to use in your teaching practice to help with your students. I still want to offer you a chance at least to talk in small groups, but that means we might not be able to finish, some of the other content. I wonder if Alyssa and Lydia, you feel comfortable for me to cut off, the part of you introducing the services by offering our audience your PowerPoint slides. So they will be learning your the services you provide, and they will have your contact information. So they will be able to approach to you if they need your support. Is that okay? So what I'm planning to do is to give us about 7-8 minutes and come back and quickly wrap up. So are you okay with that? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So my colleague Sandra will share in the chat a link to a few educational strategies I put together. I want you to have a few minutes to talk in small groups to identify one strategy you want to use or learn from each other new strategies, and then we come back and we quickly wrap up. So Sandra, when you are ready, I can probably start the breakout session. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a fruitful conversation with your colleagues in the breakout room, although it's short. So I am showing you the contact information of our panelists, Alyssa and Lydia. If you are ever in need of their support, please feel free to reach out to them. Or if you would like to continue this conversation with me, please feel free to email me. On the PowerPoint, you will have my email address. So be prepared for me to email you and say, hey, do you want to be my panelist when I offer this workshop again? So I may be reaching out and continue our conversations. Thank you so much for your participation and your contribution in the session. It's my great pleasure to have you all. And this is already the end of the session. Please feel free to leave and enjoy lunch and enjoy the rest of the day. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have questions or, like I said, would like to continue the conversation. Thank you so much. And please provide me with some feedback to help me do better in my next offering of the workshop. Thank you so much, everyone. It's my great pleasure to have you all today in the session. Okay, thank you for my panelists. You're
Thank you so
awesome.
much.
Okay, bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye.